In 44, February, I went for a physical. Didn't pass it because it had scarlet fever. So then I had the second physical in August, my mother's birthday. I passed the physical, and away I went. I was in the Army. First, I went to Des Moines to get a physical, the first one. Then the second physical I took at Fort Snelling, Minnesota. Then they shipped me down to Texas for basic training. I spent 14 weeks in Texas. I was supposed to have had 17 weeks training. I was in the 3rd Army, 359th Regiment, 3rd Battalion of the 90th Division. And I was in I Company, the 3rd Platoon. We got shipped overseas right then, after 14 weeks. We had 2 ships. We had the Isle de France and the Queen Mary. They hauled a whole bunch of us up to Scotland, I think it was. It was way up north. And then we went by train down through England. But then we crossed the English Channel on an LST, and we slept on the steel floor of that ship overnight, with water dripping down on us. Then we get off that LST in France, at Bode, France. Stepped over all the dead German bodies on the way through there and got on a truck, and then we went on an open truck. I don't know how many miles it was. It was quite a few, because we went down to Three Virgins. That's a little town just outside of Metz, France. And that's actually where the war started for us. We started on the move. That first place where we landed, well, we just got off the truck, and they stuck another guy from North Carolina, by the name of McBride, into that one, into our squad. That made 5 of us, and we were off. We were in the battle. We went over a little hill, and I got through and got in the house, but the 2 right behind me got shot. Killed. Shot through the head. Must have been a good sniper. He evidently didn't even see me when I come in. I was the first one in there. The rest of them were behind me. They got mortar fire, and the mortars got loose. The Germans had mortars set up behind this little town, see? But there was a lot of them in this town. They just swarmed out of there. Then a tank destroyer pulled up right beside the building I was in, and he let go with a 76 millimeter. And then they really scattered. So we just went from there, and that tank destroyer was moving along with us all the time, you know. You just got to take a chance on it. Got to learn how to crawl on your stomach. And I'll tell you, you got machine gun fire coming at you, you can learn darn quick. I had one guy beside me, he decided that he was going to crawl on his knees, and he got shot right through the behind. So when they said it's an EI, that's what they meant, an EI. The artillery, I was wondering there one night, we had artillery behind us, you know, what the heck's going on here? Here was our own artillery. I was an expert rifleman. There's only 3 expert riflemen out of a company of 200. Old Selk from Oklahoma and I, we'd go out on scouting at night, and of course every company had their own scouts, you know, see where the Germans were. We'd come back and report from where they were, then our artillery would shoot over our heads and over where the Germans were. We were best sneaks in the Army. We never did get caught. Most of us wound up in the hospital. I don't know, we got some kind of a liver infection. Sent me back to a field hospital. I don't know how many guys were left, so I would swear there wasn't over 2 or 3. But anyway, I just got in that field hospital, sat down, and I looked out the door. It was a tent. It was just a place for shipping us out there, and I looked up at the door there, and who was standing there but old George Patton. He would look at me over, had on his old English riding pants and his high boots. And I think I was the 8th day I was in there, somewhere in the 7th, 8th day of that 2 weeks, and the war ended. It was declared over then. Actually, it was over before, but Patton called the hospital, and our doctor was Captain Larson from Tacoma, Washington. I'll never forget that. Real nice fellow, and he walked in the room there one day, and he said, "I just got a call from George Patton. If you guys want to stay here 6 weeks, you go right ahead." And I said, "I'll take it." I didn't want to go to that company. And when I finally did go to the company, they were way down in the boondocks by Czechoslovakia, and still in Germany there, but we got down there. All we were doing was on guard duty, which is enough, because he had the ammunition dumps all over, Get that little Hitler Youth guys running around through the timber setting off bombs and everything else. Hitler got by with that, We actually didn't know anything about the death camps until a couple of months before the war ended. And of course, that's what military government, a lot of it was, that's why it was, too, what a lot of their duties, after the war was helping out the survivors that came out of the death camps. Skin and bones. And I run across a work camp. There's a bunch of women, and they had a bunch of cots and a great big wired up fence, where they couldn't get out of there. I walked by that fence that day, and I felt something crawling all over me. It was fleas, and just loaded. That's what they had to live in, and they were forced labor, making munitions and stuff for the Germans. Opened the gate and let them out of there. So, the Third Army broke up there right after the war, and everybody was dispersed. The married ones, they kind of went home right away, and of course I was only 19 years old then. Which Atlanta, a lot of them were. Then I was sent to military government. They were the ruling force after the war. So the military government in Bavaria, that took care of that area. And then finally I was sent down to Czechoslovakia. They were planning on moving out of there in a couple of months, so they had to load up all our stuff and get out of there. So about all I was sent down there for was take care of the vehicles, which they needed because the guys in the office, they took our truck out one day. That was right day before we were supposed to move out of there. It had a flat tire on it. They carried the spare tire up on the top of that vehicle, and the spare tire flipped to hit one guy in the eye, and he had a great big black eye out of it. So they fought that tire on, and they punched a hole in the radiator. I had to fix that, and they tore the clutch out of it. So an old German guy and I, the night before we moved out of there, we had to put a new clutch plate in that vehicle. And what a job without the right tools and jacks. We got her in. We used blocks and hammers and sledgehammers. It was a real heavy transmission in there. Germans made everything so ungodly heavy and a great big motor in it. We got that clutch in it, and we were a day late getting out of there, and got everything loaded up, and we had a lot of people that were helping us. Well, we had our own kitchen and everything there, and out of mostly German women that run it. We loaded them in that truck, and I hid them in the back end of the truck. Good thing we did. And get all our stuff loaded and get out of there and get to the German border. But the Russians had moved in. They were occupying the east half of Czechoslovakia, and we were on the west. They were supposed to move out on November 1st like we did, but they didn't. They moved in. Patton wanted to go in there and clean house on the Russians and get them out of there before we ended the war, which we should have done. We got back to Munich, and it was in headquarters there for a while. I can't even remember the dates now. But then I was in the motor pool, and they sent 2 trucks down to the headquarters in Berlin from Munich. So I was driving the lead truck, and I had some shaved-tailed lieutenant with me that was scared of his own shadow. And the other guy behind me, there was him and a mechanic from the motor pool, and we set off for Berlin. We had to go through Russian territory for 100 miles to get into Berlin. They give them all that territory around Berlin, to settle with the Russians. On the way in through Russian territory, convoy of Russian trucks came along and just pushed us right off the road. I had a pistol laying beside me, but I wasn't fool enough. There must have been at least 20 vehicles there with a couple of guys in each truck. I'd have been a dead duck if I ever showed a gun. So we got to Berlin and backed the trucks up to headquarters in Berlin and unloaded them. I don't know, some big cases or something. I suppose papers or records or something. Unloaded them and stayed there overnight, and then headed back to Munich. We didn't bother us going back. I was only in action about 4 months, 4.5. That was long enough. And the rest was all occupation. I was at 1 year and 10 months and 7 days in the Army. I was overseas 18 months. Never had a furlough. Of course, I didn't care. I didn't want to go home and then come back again.